The scream did not belong to the mountains. Eli Walker had lived long enough beside the Wind River to know every sound it made. He knew the groan of pine trees in winter. He knew the low rumble of spring melt. He knew the cry of hawks and the distant howl of wolves. But this sound cut through the roar of the swollen river like a blade. It was human. It was fear. Eli dropped the horseshoe file from his hand and lifted his head. For a heartbeat, he thought it was just another memory playing tricks on him. War had left him with echoes that came at the worst times. But then it came again. A desperate cry, thin and breaking. Without thinking, he ran. The river was no gentle stream that day. It was early June of 1874, and the snow from the Wyoming peaks had turned the Wind River into a raging beast. The brown water churned and clawed at the banks. Whole branches spun like broken bones in the current. Then he saw her. A flash of dark fabric caught in the branches of a fallen cottonwood. Pale skin, a limp arm. She was trapped in the middle of the torrent, her body beaten by the current. One arm was hooked around a branch. The rest of her was half underwater. Her head slipped lower with every second. Eli did not stop to think. He tore off his boots, flung aside his gun belt, and plunged into the freezing river. The cold hit him like a fist to the chest. The current fought him hard, dragging at his legs, trying to pull him under. Debris slammed into his shoulder. Water filled his mouth. But he had dragged men from battlefields before. He had pulled brothers from mud soaked with blood. This was just another fight. While he reached the cottonwood, grabbed a thick limb, and anchored himself. Up close, he saw the bruise blooming on her cheek. Her dress was torn. A leather satchel was tied to her wrist, like she refused to let it go. "Hold on!" he shouted, though her eyes were closed. Her leg was wedged between branches below the water. He took a deep breath and shoved himself under the surface. The cold stabbed at him. He worked blindly with his hands, forcing her leg free. When he surfaced, she was limp. He dragged her from the tree and fought the river back to shore. Each step felt like war. Finally, he stumbled onto the muddy bank, pulling her with him. For a long moment he lay there, chest heaving, the river roaring in his ears. Then she coughed. Water spilled from her mouth. Her eyes fluttered open. Green eyes. Confused. Afraid. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough. She tried to sit up, shivering hard. Her dress clung to her body in tatters. Realization flashed across her face, and she crossed her arms over her chest. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My land. Near the Wind River." He stood, dripping and cold. "You'll freeze out here. My cabin's close." She flinched away when he reached for her. "Not town," she said quickly. "Please, don't take me to town." The fear in her voice was deeper than the river had been. "I'm not taking you to town," he answered, "but you can't stay here." Her eyes searched his face. After a long pause, she gave a small nod. When she tried to stand, her legs failed. Eli lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. Fragile. She went stiff, but did not fight him. But he carried her to the small log cabin tucked against the pines. Inside, the room was simple. A stone fireplace, a narrow cot, a rough table, the smell of wood smoke and solitude. He set her near the fire. "Get those wet clothes off," he said, already turning his back and adding wood to the flames. His tone was firm, practical. He did not look at her. He poured coffee and added whiskey to both cups. When he finally glanced over, she was wrapped in his spare blanket, her dress hanging to dry. The bruise on her cheek stood out against her pale skin. "My name is Eli Walker," he said. "Clara Jensen," she answered softly. They drank in silence. As the warmth settled in her hands, her voice began to shake for a different reason. "My husband died," she said. "He left debts. Bad men came for the land. I had to leave." Her eyes moved to the satchel on the floor. "I rode all night. The river was too high. My horse threw me." She did not finish the sentence. Eli understood enough. The West was full of stories like hers. Widows with nothing. Men who collected debts with fists instead of paper. "You'll stay until the river drops," he said. "You're not crossing it." That night, he gave her the cot and lay on the floor by the fire. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had before. In the dark, her voice came quietly. "Mr. Walker, what is it?" There was a long pause. "Will you stay if I undress?" The word struck him harder than the river had. He understood what she meant. Payment. A trade. A woman who believed shelter always came with a price. Slowly, he turned his back to her. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Jensen," he said. "No one is going to bother you here." In the darkness, he heard her try and fail to hide a sob. And as the river roared outside, Eli Walker felt the first crack form in the walls he had built around his heart. The next morning, the river was still roaring. Eli was already awake when the sun pushed pale light through the small window. He had not slept much. Clara's question from the night before lingered in the cabin like smoke. He kept his back turned to her until he heard her breathing steady into real sleep. Now he stood by the fire, coffee simmering, listening to the river's dull thunder. Clara rose slowly from the cot. She moved with stiffness, favoring one leg. The bruise on her cheek had darkened. She kept her eyes lowered as she gathered her dried dress. "The river is still too high," Eli said without turning. "I can see that," she replied quietly. She dressed behind the blanket he had hung for her. When she stepped back into the room, she looked like a different woman. Composed. Guarded. The softness from the night before hidden again. The days that followed trapped them together. The river refused to fall. The crossing upstream was still dangerous. So Clara stayed. She did not sit idle. On the second morning, Eli stepped outside to find her kneeling in his small garden patch, pulling weeds from the damp soil. Her hands were steady, even if her body was not. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It is better than sitting," she answered. "I am earning my keep." He did not argue. He watched her quietly over the next few days. She hauled water from the creek, even with her limp. She mended his shirts with neat, careful stitches. Yet she baked bread that filled the cabin with a scent he had not known he missed. In return, he left fresh water by the door for her each morning. He split extra wood. He made sure the fire never died low at night. They did not speak much, but something unspoken began to grow between them. One afternoon, as she reached up to hang a washed shirt on the line, her dress shifted. Eli looked away too late. He saw faint silver scars across her back. They were not old accident scars. They were deliberate. Cold anger settled deep in his chest. Clara felt his gaze and stiffened, quickly pulling the fabric back into place. She said nothing, but the air changed. That night she sat at the table, turning a small silver locket in her hands. Her shoulders shook, though she tried to hide it. Eli made noise with his boots, so she would know he was there. She wiped her eyes and snapped the locket shut. "He had his father's eyes," she whispered before she could stop herself. Eli did not ask who. He did not need to. On the fourth day, a rider appeared in the distance. Jed, a ranch hand from the main spread. Clara saw him too, and fear flashed across her face. Jed dismounted near the corral, glancing toward the cabin. "Town's talking," he said, lowering his voice. "About the widow Jensen." Clara stepped back into the doorway. "Talking how?" Eli asked. Her husband didn't just die, got himself killed in a card fight, owed money to hard men, and now folks say she ran off with something that wasn't hers. Clara's face went white. Amos Jensen's stirring it up, Jed added. Says she stole from the family. After Jed rode off, Clara stood by the cold hearth, arms wrapped around herself. It's true he died in a fight, she said softly. Silas drank too much, owed too much, and we were never properly married. No papers filed. In the eyes of the law, I was nothing. The shame in her voice hurt worse than the bruise on her cheek. Eli leaned against the wall. I went to war at 19, he said quietly. Promised I would come home in a year. Came back 4 years later. My brother dead. The woman I was to marry already wed to another man. He met her eyes. Promises break easy. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was shared. That night, Clara developed a fever. It came fast. By midnight, she was burning, her body shaking on the narrow cot. Eli stayed beside her with a basin of water, but he pressed cool cloths to her forehead. He fed the fire and watched her through the long, dark hours. In her fever, she spoke without guard. You are the only one, she murmured, gripping his hand. The only one who touched me without wanting something. The words struck him deep. He thought of the scars on her back, of her offer that first night, of a world where kindness always came with a cost. By dawn, the fever broke. She slept peacefully at last. Eli stepped outside and noticed the river had lowered. The roar was softer now. She would be able to leave soon. The thought left a hollow feeling in his chest. When he turned back, she stood barefoot in the grass behind him. She wore his old faded army shirt. It hung loose around her small frame. The morning light caught her green eyes. The river is going down, he said. I know. She stepped closer. Eli, she said, using his name for the first time. Can I stay a little longer? It was not about the river. He knew that. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he gave a short nod. The crossing's still dangerous, he muttered. You can work for your keep. A small, fragile smile touched her lips, and in that quiet agreement, something shifted between them. Neither of them understood yet how much it would cost. The river finally fell back into its banks, but Clara did not leave. Days turned into weeks, and the small cabin by the Wind River began to feel less like a hiding place and more like a home. Clara moved through it with quiet purpose. She baked bread in the mornings. She sang softly while washing clothes at the creek. She planted new seeds in the garden as if she meant to see them grow. Yet Eli found himself listening for the sound of her footsteps. One afternoon, he let her ride his horse, Drum. He helped her mount, his hand steady at her waist. She rode carefully along the flat land near the river, her dark hair coming loose in the wind. Then the ground gave way beneath her. The horse stumbled near a shallow ravine. Clara slid down with the crumbling dirt and vanished from Eli's sight. He ran. He reached her in seconds, sliding down the loose earth. She was shaken but alive, dust covering her dress and fear wide in her eyes. Are you hurt? He demanded, his hand searching her arms and shoulders. I'm all right, she whispered. Relief hit him hard. Without thinking, he pulled her against him and held her tight. She clung to him just as fiercely. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of their breathing, yet he almost kissed her. He leaned close, his lips inches from hers, but then he saw something in her eyes. Gratitude. A quiet surrender. The same look from the first night in the cabin. He stepped back. That night, the silence between them felt heavy. Clara stood in the center of the room, firelight flickering across her face. "Look at me, Eli," she said softly. He lifted his eyes. "You saved me," she continued, "again and again. But you never let me thank you." "There's nothing to thank me for," he said. Slowly, she began to unbutton the old army shirt she wore, one button at a time. "Will you stay this time?" she asked. The shirt slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. She stood before him in her thin shift, scars faint across her back. It was not payment. It was a plea. Eli crossed the space between them and cupped her face gently. "I want you," he said honestly, "but not because you feel you owe me." Her control broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She told him about Kansas, about hunger, about a winter so hard she had nothing left to trade but herself, about a husband who drank and struck her, about the baby she lost after a blow to her stomach. Eli listened, rage burning in his chest, but he did not interrupt. When she finished, he wrapped his arms around her bare shoulders and held her while she cried. "You are not less," he told her. "You are braver than most men I have known." The next morning, they kissed. It was soft and uncertain. Not hunger, not debt, just two wounded souls finding each other. Days later, trouble arrived. Jed rode up fast, dust rising behind him. "There's a man in Lander asking for her," he said. "Amos Jensen. Says she stole money. Sheriff's listening." Clara went pale. Amos was her husband's brother, a cruel man who had always hated her. Eli saddled the horses. "We'll go to town," he said. "We face this straight." But the sheriff sided with Amos, called her a liar, called her nothing in the eyes of the law. So they rode south instead, hiding in an abandoned barn. That night, Clara told him everything. Silas had not just been a drunk. He had been violent. The scars on her back were from him. The baby she lost was not from Winter, but from his rage. The money she took had been her own small savings, hidden for escape. "If they want you," Eli said quietly, pressing her hand to his chest. "They take me too." He chose her side. 2 days later, Amos found them at the boarding house in town. He came with hired men. The door crashed open. A knife flashed. Eli was stabbed in the side. Clara saw him fall. Something fierce rose inside her. She grabbed Eli's dropped pistol and fired. The shot echoed through the hall. The hired man went down. Judge Miller arrived in time to see Amos arrested. But Clara only saw Eli bleeding in her lap. "Stay," she whispered through tears. "Please, stay." The doctor said the knife missed his heart by inches. Clara nursed him back to strength. She fed him broth. She held his hand through nightmares of war. When he cried out for his brother in his sleep, she whispered him back to the present. "You're here," she would say softly. "The war is over." In that small boarding room, they healed each other. The charges against her were dismissed. Amos faced trial. Weeks later, Eli stood by the window, still weak but alive. "I want to wake beside you every morning," he said simply, "if you'll have a cowboy with too many scars." Clara smiled through tears. "Only if you'll have a widow with too many ghosts." They married under a cottonwood tree by the Wind River, the same river that had tried to claim her. This time it ran calm and clear. They built a new house on a rise overlooking the water. It was small but strong, built by their own hands. People still whispered, but whispers had no power over them now. One late summer afternoon, they rode side by side along the riverbank. Clara reached for his hand. Eli smiled, a real smile that reached his storm-gray eyes. The ghosts were still there. The scars remained. but they no longer carried them alone.